Hi, my name is Hitesh Rana. I'm from Platform Squad, working in a microservice team. As nowadays, on a daily basis, new applications are developed and deployed on internet. So we are missing some major things. For example, suppose our application is being deployed on internet and it is used by our users. Suppose they are facing some issues. For example, you can say a site take more time to load, some API calls which are being sent to the server are taking a lot of time. Here we can fix that thing. We need to fix these things also. So how can we get to know what are the issues we are facing? So we can use OpenTelemetry. Like OpenTelemetry is a bunch of APIs and SDKs which give us the possibility, which give us the information to get know the traces, logs, and matrices of our application. So our main problem statement is like how we can implement this OpenTelemetry with our application. So our main problem statement is how we can implement this OpenTelemetry to our application to get to know all the matrices, logs, and traces of our application, where our application is lacking and where it is need to be more optimized. So there are a lot of tools in the market which we can use, which use OpenTelemetry, and we can use that tool in our application. So we are going to discuss about one tool which we are using for these OpenTelemetry data, and which I will explain you later through the visual. So the tool which we are using is SigNoz. SigNoz is open source ARM tool which give us the information about the logs, matrices, and traces of our application. Like we need to first implement this SigNoz to our application, then we will run that. So if our application have a lot of APIs, for example, you can say it has around 60 to 70 APIs. Like we can't trace that without any OpenTelemetry thing. Like we suppose, for example, you can say that if one API is taking a lot of time to load, it will affect our application, right? So OpenTelemetry tool will help us to get to know where the issue is, where it is taking a lot of time. So SigNoz tool gave us all these privileges. Like we can implement SigNoz with our application and to get to know where our application is lacking, and we can optimize that thing also. Like it gave us the matrices, logs, and tracing of all our application. So now let's understand how SigNoz is working with our application. For example, here is our application. Here we send data from our application to our SigNoz, where we implemented our SigNoz code in our application. Then SigNoz will give us a localhost port where we can see all the matrices and the traces, how much an application is working. For example, if suppose I am a user, I am using the application, suppose I have just set a sign up, then login, then a lot of things I have done, then all I can find these things in the SigNoz, where I can find all the API calls, like all the database calls which are happening whenever the API call is done. So it will give us a complete trace. For example, first a user hit that thing, then the API call is done, then the database call. Then it will give us all the timestamp, like how much time it is taking. For example, if it takes more than suppose 5 to 6 seconds, then we need to optimize that thing. We need to optimize our database calls which we are using. For example, we need to optimize our query which we are using to get that data or to insert that data. So SigNoz will give us those. Now coming to the working, like how SigNoz basically work. Like we will explain all these things deeply through a visual. Now let's first understand it thoroughly. SigNoz contain for example, first application is connected to SigNoz, right? SigNoz has its own database. Like it store all the data which is coming from the application in that thing. Then it is further sent to the service one. Then it further sent to the UI where we can check. For example, like as I explained earlier, like if anything happening and we have implemented SigNoz, like SigNoz is using OpenTelemetry things. Like it will give us all the logs, matrices, and traces, all of that thing. So as we have implemented that SigNoz with our application, so if we need to run that locally, for example, we need to first check, right? So we run that application, like this application send data to SigNoz, then SigNoz further process it to us. So it will give us a good UI, like we can check our graph, how much latency it is, how much latency we are getting from that thing. Like we can check our speed and all of that things. So let's now understand through the visual how our SigNoz is working internally with our application. Okay. So first, like we have application, and here we are connected that application to SigNoz, and it will give us all the log paths. Like as we discussed earlier, like it will give us all the things like how much time an application is going to execute that API call and all of that things. So now let's get more understanding of SigNoz, how SigNoz is working internally. Okay. So now coming to internally, first is OTL collector, which is like OpenTelemetry collector. Like it will collect data from our service. For example, this data will be all the things which are happening in our application. For example, if we click some button, like on that button some calls are defined. For example, for a simple example, let's say it's login sign up example, like first login, then login API will execute, it will go to the database, then from database it will come back to with the response message which we have sent that thing. So it will collect all that data from our service. Then ClickHouse is the database management system. Okay, here it is going to store that data, temporary data. It will store that temporary data which will going further to the query service, which will act as an interface between the front end part and the ClickHouse part. Okay, so query service, what will query service do? Like all the OTLs, like all the logs, traces, all that thing which are stored in the database, it will take out from database and further give it to front end. On the front end, like front end is like, for example, front end is hosted somewhere. Okay, so we can check that front end and we can find all that things there. So this is how SigNoz is working internally. Like now coming to understanding how on the UI we will check. So now coming to the front end part of SigNoz, like this is the front end, like how we are going to measure our application, like how it is working, or it is working like as expected, or we need to make optimization or something. So firstly, here we can see a graph, P99 latency, P95 latency and P50 latency. For example, P99 latency, it is good, like P95 and the last is P50. In the suppose if our graph is P50 latency, like we need to optimize it so that its graph, like it will go through P99 latency graph. So here all the application, all the calls which are made, it will give us a graph, and here the request, like how requests are made per second part. So it will give us this type of graph where we can find all the things. And the last point is like error percentage, whether if there is an error, it will give us here, it will log our error here. For example, if our application is facing some error, like we have handled that thing, it will give us here, like in the graph, like here at this point we have faced some error. And the last is the endpoint. For example, this endpoint is hit, it's P50 latency, P95 latency, P90 latency, all of these are shown here along with the number of calls. Number of calls is what, like for example, this API is being hit all around 9 times. So this is how, suppose if multiple APIs are being hit on the same time, like it will give us here, like this endpoint is hit at this number of times, like its latency is this and this, and all these things will be shown in the graph format. Like so, this is how we will manage our application, like how it is working internally, or we do need some optimization to make it goes pretty well, right? Okay. Now coming to the second scenario, coming to the second part is the traces. Okay. So as we have seen along in the graph, like how these things are performing. Now coming to the trace. Trace is like how it is going. For example, order service are being hit, or get service is hit along with like user ID. Insert order is second thing which is being hit, update user amount, and these all things will go along with like this flow. So these are the traces of our application. Along with like here we get the details, like this detail along with all of these information. This will help us to configure where our application is lagging, or is it completing its flow in a time. For example, Suppose if we face some issue, for example, here it is taking a lot of time, then this will cause impact in our application. So by SigNoz, like we can find all these things here in its UI. Like this will help us to configure, like, okay, these are all things which are doing all good, and which things do we need to make some improvements or optimization. So now let's come to the advantages of SigNoz. As SigNoz is open source and also it supports OpenTelemetry natively. And second, like, it gives us all the logs, traces and matrices in a single pane. For example, like, we don't need to go to some other tools to get some matrices, some traces. Like, it give us all these information in a single pane. And the third, like, SigNoz use columnar data store, like, which will help us to execute query really fast. For example, as we discussed earlier, like, SigNoz store the OpenTelemetry data in a database. Like, it store data in a columnar pattern, so that if when you in the second part, for example, ClickHouse button, where it is integrating the database and the front end, where it is taking the data from the database and giving to front end, like, query is really fast, which will not put any delay on that thing. So these are the advantages. And coming to the conclusion part, as the conclusion, as in the everyday aspect, like, new things are being developed and deployed, all the things, we are missing these things, like OpenTelemetry. Like, it should be implemented so that we can get more information on how our application is working on the basis of user standards. For example, like, a user is doing something and if he is facing some issue, we need to fix that thing. Like, using this tool SigNoz, like, it will give us all the privileges where we can check our application whether it's working correctly or do we need some optimization, so that the end user is not facing anything or any issue. As this tool was assigned to me as an experimental task, like, it gave me the knowledge, like, how these things are working internally. For example, as in the development phase, if we are implementing these things, OpenTelemetry, SigNoz, as we are implementing this SigNoz tool, like, it will help us to check where our application is lacking and we can resolve it in the earlier stages, in the development part, not when the end user is facing some issues. Like, this thing also increase my knowledge of working on the development thing, like, how we can manage all the issues in the earlier part, so that our end user or client may not face any issue. I hope this video finds you informative and you learn something new about SigNoz, which you can use in your daily tasks, in your day-to-day work. But that's all. Thank you.